Hello, everybody. If there's anybody out there, it's the 30th of September 2024, and this is, I think, episode 3 of the Monday Night Housing Law live stream. And at the moment, it's just me, William Flack, in here, but I will be joined in a moment by our two guests for tonight, which is Mike and Karis. And I'll just talk you through what we're going to talk about. To start with, I've got a show notes page, a case law database, a list of places to find case law updates, and then an updated list of organisations that can help with housing. A new case we wanted to have a quick chat about, Gillian's v Red Kite Community Housing, and then just some comments and questions. So moving on, I'll bring in Mike and Karis. Hello. You should be able to see yourselves on there now.
Yeah, you are. Well, how's it going?
Yeah. And
Hello.
hi, Karis. What I will do is I'll just go through each section and just talk about the things I've added to here. But do interrupt me if you want to. So the first thing, what I've done, if you if you look in the details of this YouTube video afterwards, you'll see in the details bit underneath the video that there's a link to what I've called the show notes page, because I think it is useful if people are listening to this, they don't have to think, oh, what was he on about? What was that thing he mentioned? I'll try and put a list of all the relevant things that come up and links to things we were talking about. If I don't do it in advance, I'll try and do it afterwards if something comes up. And so what you'll get here is, for instance, this is just an outline of what's going to be talked about at the beginning of tonight. And so that should be there for every session. And that's a page on my blog. So you can get that by doing William Flack blog or W Flack blog, and that will come up. So the next thing to talk about is this database. Now, this is available. You should be able to get a link to it from the show notes. And this is a database that I've made public. I've been producing it privately just for myself. Whenever I come across a new case or an old case that I need to remember, I put it in this database. So this goes, there's a lot of cases in here. I'm not sure what the total number is, but I add cases all the time, and I categorize them by tags. So you've got, for instance, if you want to find something, I mean, you can search for the name. If you go to all law reports and then do a search, this probably won't work now, but if I do a test for like Lambeth, I should think there's a few with them in, you'll get every case that's got Lambeth in it, going back there. But then if you want to think, well, what cases are there about suitability of accommodation, you can go to the tags bit and then choose a tag. In fact, that was, yeah, so this is actually on suitability. But let's say we wanted an out of borough placement. I mean, these things overlap, but so if you wanted cases about councils sticking people far away, you should have main cases. I noticed actually Nasola Mesu is not in there, so maybe I'm sure it's in the actual database, but that is the sort of leading case. Let's try NZO. Yeah, it's in there, but I didn't see. If I tag it now, I'll just do that so you can see. If I tag it with out of borough placement as well, no. Actually, I won't, because it's not letting me. But another time you'll find it. But I hope this will be useful for people, and that you can. What I should say is it's not just a list of the cases. If you open it, and this is available as a web page for everybody else. For me, I'm using it in Notion, but it publishes it to the web. So if you want to see Nasola Mesu, for instance, there are some of the cases I put notes on them, but on other ones, it's just links to. See, that's actually, I wrote a blog post about it at the time. God, 9 years ago. It seems like yesterday. But there should be a full judgment somewhere up there. Yeah, we could. Yeah, in fact, so you can follow the links, and it should take you to the actual judgments and things. It's probably being a bit slow, because we're streaming and using the web as well. But all of that stuff should be there. So please, if anybody hears of any new cases and wants to publicize them or thinks they're interesting, please send me a link or something, and I can publicize them on here. Plus, I can put them on the database, so they're there for the future. So what I've also got is a page. I drew up this list of links for myself so that periodically I go through it and have a look at what new cases there are. So I won't go through every single one of these, but I'll give you an example. The best place I think we'd all agree to find updates on housing law, case law, is the Nearly Legal blog. And so you've got a link to that. And the other ones, some really good ones actually, the capstick solicitors. Capsticks normally almost exclusively act for landlords, but they have a website which does have some really good reporting. So you go to their website, and you filter by sector. I think it would be by service or housing. Might be actually the other one. Go back. Filter by sector. I don't know why it's putting such a huge link, but if you're doing it normally, you'll get a choice there and it'll say housing, and you get some really good updates. And the same is true of cornerstone barristers, who generally act for local authorities, although I see they have got a new barrister there who seems to be doing some good stuff. This gentleman here, actually, and he's put a post about a local authority agreeing to pay £19,000 in housing benefit after they got served with some judicial review papers. I haven't got into it in detail, but I think they just made a mistake and obviously not paid what they were supposed to, but it shows what you can achieve. So that's that one. So you can get all the different law report services. I put the links that Mike's mentioned before to the Housing Ombudsman decisions, so you can go there and get those. And also I've called them webinars, but actually they're videos. I might rename that. But there's some really good videos out here. I should actually have. I'm sorry, I haven't got Home's Best Practice. That will be added to there in a minute. But there's things like Doughty Street YouTube, 42 Bedford Row. If I what have I done? Accept all. If I go, for instance, to 42 Bedford Row's website for this is their YouTube page, you can see there's some really fantastic videos which I haven't had time to watch all of, but remedies and unlawful discrimination, all sorts of things, and they're really good. I mean, they're not. They're good for people who know a bit about the subject, like I do, and for people who don't know anything. So they're really good videos. So you can find out more there. So moving on, I've also updated the list of organisations or solicitors who can help people with housing problems, and that's on the blog there. It's not a huge lot of change. I've branched out of London now. I've got a firm who are based in Oxford, Turpin Miller, who I don't know if they accept instructions from people in different places. I suspect they do, but these are all. I think I added Bernbergs. I don't know why. I'm sorry, Bindmans. I don't know why I didn't have them on there before. One of the top firms that does housing, so they're now on the page. And I think that's it for the things I wanted to just highlight. So moving on, we've got this case of Gillian's v Red Kite Community Housing, which has just been reported on Nearly Legal. But do you want to take over here, Mike, and have a, because you've had a deeper look into it than I have.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the interesting thing is that I know nothing about the law around this at all, so I've kind of read it.
Sorry, I'm just going to find. I think it's that one. That's so. If you share your screen.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, so I mean, the kind of situation is you've got private tenants, quite a large family in a 3-bed, I think it was. And this stuff goes back to 2012. It's only just been heard, and that's I've got loads of questions for you actually, Will and Karis, because I'm not quite, it doesn't actually make full sense to me. But in terms of the kind of the bits I do understand, you've got this property in High Wycombe, shouldn't too far from London, and there's basically a bunch of issues with the property. So there's huge amounts of damp, but landlords, which is this Red Kite, whatever it is, Red Kite organisation, Red Kite Community Housing, is basically trying to blame everything on the tenants and saying that they're not kind of living right effectively. But there's evidence as we go through, hard evidence that there's been multiple leaks, both through the roof, through the pipework under the bathroom, radiator in the bathroom, and then kind of things elsewhere. And that's just basically led to a bunch of what they're classed as hazards. So it was interesting. As I say, this is all new to me entirely. But if I go down, I've highlighted a few bits. So you can kind of see they kind of deal with the different issues in turn. So this is the first about the first bedroom, some mold, and there's obviously there's obviously like an expert who kind of went in for the tenant, and there's an expert who then went in for the landlord, I think. And again, the judge is basically just giving an opinion. So in this case, he's saying that the mold in the bedroom is in part caused because there's not enough roof insulation, and effectively the evidence is because the landlord themselves accepted that was the case. So there's a bunch of stuff that the landlord seems to be acting perversely as well. So they kind of tried to counterclaim, or it seems they tried to counterclaim to try and put the tenant off from going further, try to kind of bully them out of it. So yeah, you kind of got this. Yeah, the judge kind of goes through and kind of again, I'm not familiar with these kind of sections at all, but they kind of just label them as hazards. So again, it's pretty much similar story all the way through. Again, this one here, loose insulation. So I guess the point here is that all of the issues, or certainly the issues that are noted, are caused by deficiencies in the property rather than the kind of the lifestyle choice of the family. And they don't say how. I mean, they don't appear to have sort of said how much compensation or how much money they're going to get from it. It's going to be kind of handed down later on. But yeah, basically they're saying it's there's a whole bunch of hazards, and I guess again I'm not familiar with the law here, but I guess it's then taken to mean that it's not fit for human habitation. And again, I don't know what the implications of that are. This just to make sense of it, if you're reading quickly, this Mr. Smithringale is the expert who's basically given some kind of had an inspection or whatever, and given an opinion on this sort of thing. So yeah, and then things like the fence is leaning over, and that's also categorized as an issue. So yeah, I mean that's kind of I sort of scanned through it. And that's kind of sort of things I picked up. So yeah, in terms of remedies, I don't really know. So Miss Gillians is seeking general damages for distress. This bit here I'm reading, and then the counterclaim for the landlord was just basically dismissed, if that's the right word. Just kind of didn't look good on the landlord, to be honest. But that's where it's kind of left. So again, I don't know if you guys can shed some light on kind of what's actually going on behind the scenes here. I got you can get this is the full kind of transcript of the case, but if you read the nearly legal summary, you'll probably find it more intelligible. So if you haven't already subscribed to Nearly Legal's kind of blog post, you got nearlylegal.co.uk. You can just put your email address and you get these updates, usually like middle of the night on a Sunday night. But yeah, I don't know what in terms of kind of. I don't know, in terms of the kind of things which are helpful for other people. I guess it seems to be that all of the issues were tied back to the condition of the property and defects of the property, rather than not opening the windows or kind of drying clothes on radiators and stuff. I know I mentioned that was mentioned in there as well. So yeah, I don't know if you guys have got any kind of comments what would be helpful for people who are in that same sort of situation. It seems that it's been a ridiculously drawn out process. If they're kind of talking about issues which were kind of raised in 2012, seems like really, I don't know, I'm not sure if this is a particularly optimistic kind of case with people who might be having a rubbish landlord, or whether it actually just shows how long it takes to actually get a good outcome. So I don't know, there's my sort of thoughts or questions, whatever, starting off some of my questions anyway.
Do you want to say anything, Karis, before I do?
I do. I do think it's an example of where you've got the tenant, and there's also the to put the landlord on notice that there's repairs. So there's that argument of when do the landlord know, and then with damp, there is so many issues we've had where landlords will go in and paint over the mould. So they'll be like, yeah, we dealt with it, we've treated it, it's all done now. And then they come in. So at what point is that a notice? I mean, that with disrepair, how is it good law when it's such a variable topic on each case? So when someone's vulnerable and you've got to get the landlord to come in, and if it is a social landlord, when they come in, they're just kind of like haphazard. Yeah, we've done this bit, and then it's come back, so it's a reoccurring problem, and it'll be years, especially if they've lived there for a long time. Then they've got years to go through before they actually get somewhere with it, and you've got to actually be able to take your landlord to the court to get something done. And with legal aid, it's about making sure the landlord does the repairs, but you've got all that time of when they put on the notice, the arguing beforehand, the schedule of what should have been done, what went through it beforehand. All of that information is, that should all be, I think, there should be a bit of transparency in what work they do where, and when people, that should all be published. Part of the landlords, social landlords will say is that we don't have the housing stock, and we need to build more houses. It's like, but you also need to maintain what you have, and going forward, maintaining the property you're gonna get if you build new houses, because there's issue with new builds as well. So you've got to be able to maintain your property to a higher standard, and I think you should be held to a higher standard while saying that. But there is a standard you should be held to and it should be transparent, and you should be held more accountable with what you're doing and have accurate records, and not just being, yeah, I'm saying there is that. They'll say with tenants, they'll be like, oh, well, they didn't allow access. It's the same argument you see it time and time again. They didn't allow access, and they push the blame on them when the landlord is responsible for all the repairs. They should be doing more to engage with their tenant, not just be like, well, you didn't act in a tenant-like way, you didn't give us access. It's like the repairs still need doing to that extent. So you don't get that being.
There was a lot of that in this case, Gareth. So like the kind of always kind of making out like it was a tenant. So for example, the bathroom floor was like really mouldy and stuff, and the kind of landlord saying, well, yes, because they're not kind of having a shower and kind of mopping up, whatever. But when we look at it, the mold's all under the radiator, which has been leaking. It's not actually where the people have been kind of walking about, with all wet. And there's a lot of that. There's mention of the whole thing about not allowing access in there as well, but the judge basically didn't pay that any attention. And I think it seems like a lot of the work that needed doing was finally done once the kind of papers have been issued. So things like there's like for example, there's an electric socket in the kitchen, which was obviously dodgy for years, and that got replaced just as it was all happening. And then there's the kind of debate around they kind of just kind of painted over it, and there's still obviously a leak upstairs in the bathroom underneath the bath, and they just kind of it'd be fascinating to kind of hear from someone who's been through that, just kind of what's involved. I mean, we've had questions on kind of the live stream of both our channels around just those ongoing issues.
And the council will drag it out for years. I mean, this is years they've not dealt with this property. We've had the same thing, like the roof collapsed. 10 years later, it's collapsed in the same place because they haven't fixed it properly. So they've come in, we've done this bit. So there should be more transparency when they do repairs, because why is it happening again and again? The same issues reoccurring because you've not actually dealt with the problem. You just came in, signed on a little bit of work. Yep. So you're doing something. So it's, I do this a lot. So, and it's years and what the family went through, having to live in mold. It's proven now that mold causes deaths in your small children. So why are they allowed to continue to just not be accountable for it?
Have you guys got an idea of like how much money there's going to be? I mean, because I think Miss Gillian's is asking for £5,000, which I'm always kind of interested by the disparity between different areas of law and how much money you can get for certain things as opposed to others. But that seems like that's their family home for 12 years has been just dangerous, genuinely hazardous. and yet £5 doesn't seem to really be a particular. I mean, if you think, get these days with the LGO at the moment, they're kind of recommending seven or £8 for being in B&B for a year.
Yeah.
You're in the same kind of ballpark here in terms of the disruption to your family and stuff. If you're living in a property which is just basically rotting whilst you're living there, so I don't know. Just I guess the question would be on what can people do to kind of speed that process up? Would kind of go in public with the pictures? I mean, that's interesting. It'd be really interesting to see the actual photos of the property. I don't know if they're available along with the transcript, but that would be as kind of the evidence bundle. But that'd be interesting to kind of see, because it's one thing reading it on words, it's another thing to see a picture of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's probably unlikely that the photographs will get published, but I mean, in maybe in time, these things will become more public, and people will make more use of the media, especially with sort of large landlords who should be exposed for this. Can I say a couple of things, just going backwards? The point you were making, Mike, about the amount of compensation. I mean, 5,000 in these circumstances is a very low figure. This judgment here may not be the end of the story, because there may be further assessment. But the problem they had, which is alluded to, is that the claim form only said 5,000. When you issue a claim in the county, well, in any court, in I think High Court or County Court, you say that you're claiming damages, but you don't at the time you issue know what those damages are. Where it's loss of enjoyment of the home, they have to be assessed. So you say, we'll give you a ballpark figure. So we'll say damage is limited to X. And so you could say £5,000. You could say £50,000. The problem you have at the time when you issue the proceedings is that the issue fee is calculated by reference to the amount of damages you're claiming. So if you're claiming, I mean, I ought to have this to hand, but I haven't. But you can look on the government website. There's a list of what the fees are. But if you're claiming sort of 15,000, you've got to pay about £1,000 issue fee. Whereas if it's 5,000, it's tenth of that. So I think the tendency for people is to go for a lower figure, and then it's not set in stone. I mean, some barristers for the landlords will say, "Aha, you said £5,000, so you can't have more." But I don't think there's anything in that says you can't actually apply to amend. You could retrospectively amend your claim form. So I would have expected the damages here to be higher, and the way that general damages are calculated is that you take the amount of the rent and you then apply a percentage to that rent based on the loss of enjoyment of the home. And the usual figure for this sort of thing is somewhere around 30 to 40%. It could be more, it could be less. If you're claiming more than 50%, eyebrows will be raised and say, well, it's got to be pretty extreme. So if you say 30% of the rent, say you rent up, well, you can do the maths probably, but say if your rent was, say, £1,000 a month, you'd be getting £300 a month. And then if you're looking at 6 years, which would be your general maximum for this sort of thing, you'd be looking at 12,000 a year times 6 is 7,000. Is that 72,000? Or
No, so the
7,200.
percentage. So you're looking at something like I don't know, like £5 a year or something on those figures.
Yeah.
So say 6 years, 30 grand.
Yeah.
I mean,
that would be more like it. And then on top of that, you've got what lawyers helpfully call special damages, which is a sort of weird term, which means basically anything you've got to reach in your pocket to put right, as opposed to just assessing for loss of enjoyment. So if the ceiling caved in and your vinyl record collection got destroyed, or something happened that very common to have clothes having to be thrown away because of damp and mold. So you can claim for those as well. So you normally stick in the cost of replacing your belongings. Then going backwards further than that, the thing I think is significant about this case, and I feel embarrassed and I think if Giles Peaker, who wrote this post, was watching, he'd probably be wincing at my ignorance, because I think the reason that he posted this and was excited about it was that it was the first time that a circuit judge in a disrepair case has looked at the definition of unfit for human habitation, and that's particularly important because of the I've forgotten, the Homes Fitness for Habitation Act, which Giles was instrumental in drafting, which changed the law on disrepair, so that the before that act, the Landlord and Tenant Act required landlords to repair defects. So you had to identify something that was broken and say fix it. You couldn't just say I want the place to be in a nice condition, because they could say, oh well, it was a dump when you moved in, and so it's not our problem. Nothing's gone wrong, and so then now they've actually got to maintain a standard which is different. You may say, well, and this is an interesting question, that if something's unfit for human habitation, you'd think that the amount of the percentage to be applied to the rent would be 100%, really, because you'd say, well, you're giving me somewhere that's unfit for human habitation, I can't live here. But obviously people do live there, and this poor woman's been living there for years with her children, so they do live there, but they're at risk of harm to their health. Now, I'd like to study. I mean, I got a bit of a shock when I thought, oh, I'll look at Giles's summary here. I'm assuming it is Giles that wrote the summary. Sometimes other people on Nearly Legal, they've guessed. Oh, yeah, it is. It's Giles has done it. I thought I'll read this and then I'll dive into the judgment in more detail. And then I saw it's 54 pages, and I didn't. I was busy getting the graphics ready for this show, so I didn't. I'm afraid I didn't give it the attention it needs, but I will do. And then my last thing, I think this case is interesting because it does show the usual mantras that landlords use, and it's the same thing you get time and time again. Is number one, untenant-like behaviour. I think that was the term used in the summary there. So it's always they're drying their clothes on the radiators. They're not opening the windows enough. I mean, I don't know how much you're supposed to live with the windows. I mean, in the middle of winter, you don't really want to have the windows open all the time.
What they were suggesting seemed really unreasonable. They're saying like that they need to open front and back doors for 5 minutes every day or something to let the air blow through. And you think, well,
Yeah,
if it's freezing outside, that's very expensive, if nothing else, to be for heating your home again.
and it's very common for landlords to say you should open the windows whenever you're cooking as well, which means that your sort of kitchen turns into a sort of back garden. So there's that one. There's the closed on the radiator. There's the not opening the windows enough, doing other things. In this case, it was suggested that the family was to, somehow they were responsible because they had a big. There was 13. Was it? No, not 13 children. 6 children, I think. Sorry. There was a lot of
It started
children
off at 8
anyway.
and went down to 6.
Yes, so they'd say, "Oh, it's not our fault you got so many children in there," because the idea is, I mean, I did have once, there's too many people breathing in there, because breathing creates condensation. And then the other thing, if they can't get you on that, they'll get you on the oh, you refused access. We've tried and tried to come round to do the stuff, and you've never let us in. So they then use that one.
In this case, they tried it, but then the family said, "Yeah, we had COVID that one time," and the judge said, "Yeah, that's reasonable." So, yeah, what's the landlord talking about? I mean, it's amazing. It's kind of like I'd be interested. It begs a whole bunch of questions for me. What's the structure of these housing associations? Because I thought there's kind of some sort of charitable kind of foundations they need to have, and you just think, well, do they have trustees? What's their board? How would you kind of shame them into doing better? I think that would be kind of my thinking of it. I know someone's just put in the chat there. Dollar of FM has basically said he's kind of, or he or she has used the best practice before to get some things changed in a new build housing association house. So there's obviously, I mean, I think the housing ombudsman does stuff on this, but it just seems that if there was like a kind of a wholesale movement of people just publishing photos of their property and shaming their, particularly social landlords, kind of think some private landlords probably don't have any shame, but social landlords you think should have a bit of shame when they're just allowing their properties to be like this. And as I said, in this case, it was clearly that they just hadn't ever bothered fixing anything that they should have fixed.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to make this comment fit, and then I can add it. So you can probably read that now. I can add these. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we can hopefully do with media and social media is create a fuss about this, and I've noticed the BBC have been getting more putting news stories about mold and stuff. So, and I think it does, but I mean, sadly, I mean, it's a sort of post office syndrome that housing associations are sort of Kafkaesque mockeries of what they set out to be. Back in the sort of 60s, when it was sort of progressive people getting together and thinking about positive values, you've now got chief executives on ridiculous salaries, which I still don't understand why the head of a housing association should be paid like a sort of footballer or something.
They're on like a
Yeah,
quarter of a million, so plus benefits.
Yeah,
So
so
the big one in Bedford's is on that sort of amount. That's nuts.
so you've basically then got the thing where the loyalty is to the organisation and to making sure you keep your salary, and your chances of getting promoted. I'm sorry to be mean about it, but I mean I've just found that I don't know if other people's experience, but the big names, like I don't mind naming them, like London and Quadrant, Peabody, Poplar Harker, you know, they're very good at publishing wonderful, gushing things on their websites about how committed they are to maintaining standards and helping disabled tenants. But in practice, it's worse than you imagine. And in this case, I'm not familiar with that particular organisation, but that's just typical. I mean, that's just typical. You get that all the time. And the barrister will stand up in court and just read out the list of accusations and then lay into the experts. If you can't do that, then claim that their expert is somehow amateur and corrupt, and the solicitors are ambulance chasers, and so yes, it's a good example, but not exceptional. But I'd like to study in more detail the impact it has on the way in which lawyers pursue disrepair claims, and instead of the tradition, which has actually been gone for quite a while now, of just saying you've got to put defects right, it's about maintaining standards. So yeah, that's I'm just sorry. I've been so let me see. Let's see what other comments we've got here coming up.
And also, we have to look at how to help people that can't get a solicitor, how to to deal with their case when the landlord will be saying the same thing. Well, you did this and you did this. They'll be stuck in that circle for 10 years and they can't actually get it into court. So, in one way, the unfitness for human habitation is a bit toothless if you can't access it. It's just kind of the same thing. So, in one way, it's good this has come out, but someone who can't access a solicitor will be stuck in that push me, pull me game.
Yeah, and as Cheeseface says here, it's important to keep records, and I think it's the same thing with homelessness applications. You want to be sending emails. You've got to find out. A lot of these organisations have a dedicated. I mean, sometimes they have a disrepair form on their website, which is not as good as being able to send emails to some known address where you can demonstrate that they got it. The other problem with housing associations now is that their telephone communications have sort of deteriorated to the level of sort of caller centre hell, really. You can hold for hours and get through to somebody who'll read off a screen and tell you where you live, and that's about all they can do. But they can pass the message on to somebody else, but you probably won't hear back from them. So and then of course, do they keep a record of the fact that you called that day and said you had the problem? I very much doubt it. So it's best to keep the records. And also, when you do speak to somebody, if somebody calls you, always make a note of their last name, their full name, including their last name, and write it down somewhere, because they will, you'll get the thing about they've never reported it. If we knew about it, we'd have done it, but they never reported it. And when we did try and contact them, we couldn't get hold of them. So you can then say, well, we did speak to
And it comes to
so-and-so.
the question of when exactly are they on notice that there's a disrepair?
When does sorry, are you asking that or saying that? So the note.
No, in the try and myriad of who called who, and
Yeah.
they've got to be when exactly they put them on notice that there was a disrepair.
Yes.
I mean the video I put on the on my channel a couple of months ago with the mum who had a number of issues with her current home, but had in previous ones as well. She's in temporary accommodation with a private landlord, but that video worked a bit of magic actually, because I'll probably do more about it, but it was a very good outcome in the end. But there's actually a little bit of kind of a little bit of skill to actually getting photographs of bad problems, because some problems are obvious. You get some like damp all the way down the wall. That's nice and easy. But I think what we actually, one bit, we took a video of, like, we just put some marbles on the floor and they kind of all rolled quite swiftly across the floor to the side. So there's kind of, that was just kind of showing that the floor was not level, related to some structural issues. Another bit, we kind of I would put a glass of water on the shelf and just jumps on the floor, and it just kind of immediately sort of jumps up. Now, so you kind of get a bit creative with how you're capturing that stuff, because as I say, some of it's photogenic, for want of a better word, and some of it, if you just take some photos from a long way, it doesn't look very good. You've got to get close sometimes in the right angle. You've got to experiment a little bit. But then that then sent to some counsellors seemed to work wonders very quickly, because it looked disgusting basically, and they were Bedford Council were trying to say that they'd inspected the property and everything was fine, it was suitable, but it clearly wasn't.
This is a big worry.
I'm interested around. Sorry, well, I was going to say, like, so I think it'd be interesting if there's kind of local, almost like Facebook groups, where people anonymously send in their photos of disrepair, and kind of, you don't have to do anything with it technically, but you you're just raising it as an issue, kind of raising it as an evidence base of the conditions in the local area. Yeah, I think that's kind of something that would potentially just kind of escalate the issues a bit further around the kind of usual sort of avenues. Because, as you say, Karis, like, great if you can get a solicitor and wait 12 years, but if you can't, then there might be a better way, or a quicker way of doing it.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe we can sort of start keeping logs of things online with these sort of things. Just moving on slightly, one of the things I was interested in doing in future editions of the live stream is to do a sort of analysis or assessment of the accessibility of different local authorities for homeless applications, because I think if you look at there's quite a lot of examples on websites for local authority housing departments of how they make it difficult to get through, and you can see that it must have been conscious in the design of the website. You can get a link to shelter, so you can get if you want to know what's going on, check shelter out, but there's no link to say help. Please, can I have some help from the local authority? And some are better and some are worse. But it'd be quite good to do a sort of score and give them points for accessibility, amount of useless information. I noticed as well as euphemisms like, supported housing has become sort of inverted term to mean, instead of housing where you get support from people who sort of assess you and are committed and qualified, it's now a euphemism for sort of some chaotic place where they dump everybody and subject them to summary eviction, etc. But I noticed, I was just thinking the term housing options, when you think about it, it's got a slightly sinister ring to it, because it used to be homeless persons unit. If you were homeless, you could go there and the unit would assist you. I mean, it's not the nicest of terms, but it gives you an idea that if you're homeless, you get help. Housing options almost it's sort of suggesting, well, maybe you can do something else other than take up the opportunity to have your statutory right to housing. There's other options, like, why don't you go and find somewhere in the private sector? That's always a popular choice. So but you can see this in practice when you look at the websites, and also so many people, when they ring up, just get told that thing, why don't you go and find somewhere, we can't help you. I'd like to be able to check the telephone centres as well, but the danger is if we go ringing councils up in order to sort of see how quickly they respond, we could be guilty of making false applications once we start speaking to people. So we probably won't do that. But I'd be interested to hear from other people who've had experience of that.
I think there's, like, if I had the money to do it, and I don't, but just to kind of, there would be a legitimate way of doing that, of kind of doing secret shopper type stuff. I've seen it done before, like on Panorama and stuff, and they just the journalists never bothered to actually really kind of research what the law was. They kind of say, oh, this isn't too bad. It's like, well, they just broke the law and this person got left homeless. That's pretty bad. I reckon that's probably like the one thing I haven't really kind of explored in terms of like levers to pull around this. But I reckon it's doable. There's a secret shopper report that Shelter did for Bedford. Bedford basically in 2019 they had to rejig everything, and they did a secret shopper report, and there was 31 different approaches by these two individuals. And I think there was only one where the council correctly picked up on the fact that the person was owed a Section 108 duty. But the shelter report was like saying, oh, most people were really polite. And it's like, yeah, but they're polite, but they weren't actually housed anyone. So what good is that? So it's kind of weird. So that's kind of when I lost a bit of respect for shelters. I thought, why would you not do that exercise properly? It'd be an interesting video for us to do. Is kind of I'll share the report with you and kind of just point the errors, point out the errors as we go through it.
Yeah, I'd like to see that and focus on these things a bit more. So what was the other thing? Oh, yeah. Sorry,
can I just go back to the disrepair claim? I think we had a question about the asthmatic. He was being offered a property that had mould in. So if you've had to go through the homeless process and allocations, and you've gone through all the fight to get yourself housed, how do you then complain if something's wrong with it?
Sorry, could you say that again? Sorry, I was. How do you?
If you're going through it, fighting through the homeless process, and you've just been offered a house after the lengthy fight about getting housed, being owed a duty, how do you then complain about a property in disrepair if there's something wrong with it?
What if it's given to you as new accommodation? It's just sort of temporary, or
like we had a question the other day with they were offered a room, but it was the builder had said to them, "There's a problem with mold here," and they were an asthmatic. So how would they then bring up to the landlord, I'm concerned you're putting people in a vulnerable person or it's already vulnerable in a really precarious situation if they've got to then complain about disrepair issues and mold issues.
They get dismissed as being too picky. That's the kind of response they probably get is, you just need to take what you're given. That kind of mentality from the council. But I mean, I guess in this is Gillian's case, like presumably if any of them had any health issues, they'd immediately be this would be like a pretty straightforward situation where they would be legally homeless whilst they were still in there. So I mean, I didn't pick up on that at all within it. I mean, the kind of judge was saying, yeah, these are all hazards, but there was no. I didn't see anything which was actually saying, yeah, it's actually had X, Y, and Z effect on the children or the mum or whatever, other than the stress and all. But yeah, I think that's kind of. I guess all it would take is the doctor's letter just to kind of say, yeah, this person's got really bad asthma and they therefore needs to be someone without damp and mold.
I'm tending to find that so many people are having a problem with being put into temporary accommodation to find that it's unsuitable for the most obvious common reason is because it's in a state of disrepair and there's mold. And I'm just coming up with a standard procedure now where I have to do either a request for a review or a judicial review pre-action letter about suitability, and a pre-action disrepair letter to the landlord about the condition of the place, and then just start these double cases rolling. And I'm finding I get about one of those, every week now. And then people that I get housed, then they come back to me and say, you probably, if it isn't the case, they've single men getting put in temporary accommodation, which is so awful. They, supported accommodation, they'd rather be homeless. And then the other one of families being put in terrible places with damp and mold growth, and landlords who don't return their calls. But you'd think it would be checked out more. I mean, the council is supposed to carry out checks before, but I think they're just so desperate for accommodation from private sector landlords that they're not checking them properly, and they're not checking. I mean, how somebody that lets a property out that's in a terrible condition can be certified to be a fit and proper landlord? But obviously they've got they're biased. They don't really want to say no, this person isn't fit, because then they can't use the property.
in my opinion, that's very much what happens. But that's such a short-sighted approach, because by not challenging those, I mean, bottom line is, if they challenge, if they even challenge it like a handful of landlords locally, that, you know, kind of the worst ones, then immediately landlords get the message. Now, you've still got the same number of properties, so it's not that you've also got migration between different districts to some extent, but if you've got an X number of houses and you've got Y number of homes, or people in general, then actually all you're going to do by challenging landlords is push up quality of accommodation. You're not going to create more homeless people, because there's still the same number of, same number of flats, same number of homes. So I think, again, it just comes back to that really short-sighted approach that a lot of housing teams have, where they save a little bit of money from their budget this year, but it costs the council millions more in the long run, because they all the impact this kind of has, and just the damage it does to society. You know, look at financial terms. I would imagine that this family is probably, going to be affected by that for many years, not having that kind of environment growing up, and that will then have an impact on their whatever, they kind of what they end up doing later in life. And it's just, I don't know, you need political kind of will to do it, and I think it'd be possible. And I was reading a bit more of Nick Bano's book about basically against landlords, and I think a lot of what he says is, it sounds reasonable. Is, to just challenging bad landlords. It's a good thing to do. But
I think
I don't know.
as well, a lot of it comes down to local authorities now. I mean, I know it's easy for me just to have another sort of soapbox to slag off local authorities on, but they're looking at it constructively. They have a positive role to play in putting this right, which is because they've got a statutory duty to put people in suitable accommodation, which these places are preventing them from discharging. They've got a statutory duty to protect people from hazards under the 2004 Act, and I mean, I've got to look into that more. And also, they're increasingly having license. I mean, they're doing licensing of private landlords. I mean, I've noticed Lewisham Council have got posters up about landlords now need to get a license to rent out. But presumably, one of the criteria, I mean, must be that your properties are in a reasonable condition and you're not exposing people to danger of damage to their health. So ideally, what we need to be doing is seeing this, like with homelessness, is just educating the people in the council to say, why are the housing committee presiding over a situation where there's terrible accommodation in the borough, when they've got a number of different angles to be tackling it from?
I think to do that, you've then got to go back to the kind of organising approach of gathering, through a local little Facebook group or something, just gathering proof. What essentially you want is whoever in the district is affected by this sort of stuff to be providing photos, so it just becomes like impossible to deny, and then bumps up the kind of political to-do list. I think without that, without that organising, without that kind of that public voice, whatever, then you're going to find it just never gets any traction.
Yeah, there's a lot of work for sort of networks of people interested in housing law to take up, isn't there? But I think it's an interesting time for us to be able
Cheese
to
Face's comment is bang on. So
because
so Bedford, that property I was talking, that seemed to be like literally the landlord was like, well, I can't do anything else with it, so I'm going to offer it to the council's TA, because it was like a 4-bed or something. Council just took it, didn't inspect it, it was terrible, roof was falling in, and ended up kind of causing a bit of strife in them. But I think that's what happens. I think literally the landlords, that must be the kind of the scraping the bottom of the barrel what they can do with the property to make money, is just to offer it as TA. And because standards are so low, or because people are so desperate that and so powerless at the time to really do anything about it.
Yeah. So I think I may have mentioned this on when we were speaking off, when we weren't broadcasting on your live stream the other day, but I'd like to say, just to say something positive, so that anybody who's listening from a local authority knows that I'm not just sort of driven by a sort of pathological hatred of local government, which I should hasten to say I'm not. I believe strongly in local government and hope they see me as the loyal opposition rather than somebody who wishes them harm. But I came across, I mentioned Westminster Single Homeless Project, which is run by Westminster City Council as part of their housing department or team, and they have a system, and I've got to look into it further. I was dealing with a very, very vulnerable client who was borderline whether he had capacity to make a homeless application, and certainly difficulty in managing a tenancy on his own. And the worry was that he would get put in some of the sort of places that we've been talking about, where it's sort of bad for people who are vulnerable. But then he got picked up by this, and also then there's also the problem, which I can rant about another time, of getting an adult social services assessment carried out in the naive hope that this would lead to some sort of plan to help people with their housing and managing their affairs, which is almost observed in the breach, because social workers, to be fair to them, I mean, not that I'm saying it's an excuse, but you've got to accept it. They've had their funds cut so much, and they've got so many different responsibilities, that they literally see their role as sort of dealing with people who need help getting out of bed in the morning, and washing themselves and things like that. But you can't expect, they say, well, that's not our role, but it is. But then you end up judicially reviewing them. But anyway, the Single Homeless Project was saying, no, we'll make sure we'll monitor this guy and provide him with support services. And then, believe it or not, I even said, and at the end of the 6 months, we'll look into, how we can get them into social housing, because that's probably better for them. I thought, my God, a local authority talking like a housing advisor from this side of the barricades, and thinking what you need to do to actually help somebody. And I was so amazed. I said, this is like, this is how things should work if they did work. And most of my job is dealing with things that are not, is broken and doesn't work. And so I said to the woman I spoke to, would she be interested in talking on a future episode of this, about what they've achieved there. And she said yes. I don't know if management will sign off on that. I hope they will. But that's the nice thing I noticed as well. That malevolence you get when you deal with a really bad decision maker, and it's a bit like in this case we're talking about, the disrepair case. The spirit in which they respond is really malevolent. In that, you remember that you were telling that story in your video about the housing officer writing you a letter saying they thought you were actually sort of motivated by things that weren't in the best interests of the applicant. And yes, but if you're dealing with people who are actually doing their job properly, they've got no reason to be all negative and secretive. So I'm hoping that they can talk some more and show how it can be done. So any more comments? Have I missed anybody? So I think, unless there's anything anybody else wants to talk about, I think I might wind it up in a minute, because I've got to go out. But I can keep going till past. But I hope that if anyone's got any ideas for future things that we could focus on, I mean, I think I will try and do a little bit about, maybe we could prepare some thoughts on one particular authority at a time. And that's not necessarily to go for the worst ones, but just to look at the ones we deal with locally and see what they're getting wrong and what we think they could get better on, and then maybe keep some sort of score sheet, and maybe do the same thing with social landlords. Because that's the other thing, when people come to journalists or even other lawyers who are doing a case, like if you wanted to do a case about a local authority sending people out of borough, it's useful to have a record somewhere other than having to do freedom of information to get the stuff about how often it's happening. So yeah, that's it really from me. So shall I call it a day there? And I've got
I
Robbie.
can't see any more questions on there.
No.
So just that person who's asking about getting help, I guess. I mean, I'm not quite sure what your position is for, but I think the list of solicitors on Will's website that take legal aid is probably worth checking out.
Well, I noticed, if we go back to the list, I mean, I'll put my hand up. If I go back to here, which you may have noticed that at the top of this page, if I can get to it, and then I'll just take this comment away. Yeah, it's actually got my email address there. So you can I mean, I'm not saying to everybody, come on. If anybody, I'm desperate for work because I am very very busy. But if people can't find a solicitor and or they want to contact me, I can't promise I can take the case on, but I can have a look at it and see what I can do. I might have to put you on a waiting list, but I think that's better than just saying no, we haven't got. Because the problem is, if you call most of the people on that list that are good, I mean, they'll probably tell you they haven't got capacity, unfortunately, because they haven't. I mean, if you, it would be, I mean, interesting to see. But I mean, I send this list out to people, and then they come back to me and say, I called everyone on it, and they're all nobody's got capacity. Are you free now? It doesn't happen that much, but I try and help people. So yeah, that's the one, Robert. If you want to email me on that email at the top there, I can have a look into your case for you if you like. So that's it for now. So thank you everybody that's come along. I hope that it's been useful, and thank you Mike and Karis for joining in again. And hopefully see you both on Thursday if you're around for Mike's show.
I'll be there. Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks,
so
Rob.
that's it for today. Bye.